They came from the frozen north with longships and axes, and they terrified the known world for 300 years. Viking warlords were not myths. They were real men. Violent, calculating, and capable of staggering cruelty. They raided monasteries, founded cities, and sat on thrones from England to Constantinople. But every one of them died, and how they died tells you everything about who they were. These are the deaths of the most legendary Viking warlords in history. Ragnar Lothbrok. Ragnar Lothbrok had raided Paris. He had plundered England. He had spent decades as the most feared man in the Norse world, and every king in Europe knew his name. By the time he made his final voyage to England, he was old, and most of his men were dead, and he knew exactly what was about to happen to him. Around 865 AD, Ragnar landed on the Northumbrian coast with a small band of followers. Accounts vary. Some say a storm destroyed most of his fleet. Others say he went deliberately, knowing the odds, seeking the kind of death that would make his sons avenge him. What's certain is this. King Aelle of Northumbria captured him without much of a fight. Here's where it gets dark. Aelle had a specific punishment in mind. Ragnar was thrown into a pit of snakes, not quickly, not mercifully. He was lowered in alive, stripped, and left to be bitten repeatedly while Northumbrian soldiers watched from above. Medieval accounts describe Ragnar singing as the snakes bit him, taunting his captors, calm in the face of an agonizing death. Whether that part is legend or truth, no one knows for certain. What isn't legend is what came next. His sons, Ivar the Boneless, Bjorn Ironside, Hvitserk, Sigurd and Ubba, launched the great heathen army in response. They invaded England with over 10,000 men. They captured King Aelle and killed him in the bloodiest way they knew, carving the blood eagle into his back. Ragnar had calculated his own death as a weapon. He was right. He was approximately 60 years old. No one alive today knows exactly where he died or where he was buried. The pit has never been found. Ivar the Boneless. Ivar the Boneless was one of the most feared commanders the Viking Age produced. He led the great heathen army into England, conquered York, killed King Aelle, and spent years carving a path through the British Isles that left entire kingdoms shattered. He was brilliant, cold, and methodical in a way most Viking leaders were not. He preferred strategy over brute force, which made him more dangerous than any berserker. The name Boneless has puzzled historians for centuries. Some believe he suffered from a congenital condition, brittle bone disease or a severe form of skeletal dysplasia, that left him unable to walk without assistance. Others believe it was a metaphor for unusual flexibility, either physical or political. The sagas offer no clear answer. What the sagas do record is that Ivar died in Ireland around 873 AD. Peacefully, which is almost impossible to believe given how he lived. He had ruled Dublin and dominated much of the Irish Sea region for years. When death came, it came without drama. He died of what the chronicles describe simply as a sudden, hideous disease. Here's the dark irony. The man who had avenged his father's snake pit death by carving open a king's ribcage and pulling out his lungs, died quietly, in a bed, in Ireland. No battlefield, no last stand, no enemy blade. His body was allegedly buried with enormous ceremony, the Norsemen believing that enemies who attacked his burial mound would be defeated. Ivar the Boneless was approximately 50 years old. His sons continued ruling Dublin for another generation. The hideous disease that killed him was never identified. Eric the Red. Eric the Red was exiled twice before he discovered Greenland. The first exile was from Norway for manslaughter. The second was from Iceland, also for manslaughter. He was a man who resolved disputes with an axe, and early medieval Scandinavia, not exactly a peaceful place, eventually decided it had had enough of him. His response to his second exile was to sail west into waters no European had charted. He found a massive island, spent 3 years exploring it, and named it Greenland, deliberately according to the sagas, because a good name would attract settlers. It worked. He returned to Iceland, recruited colonists, and led 25 ships back to his new territory. 14 of them survived the crossing. Eric ruled the Greenland settlement from his farm at Brattahlid, and he ruled it well. When his son Leif sailed further west and found North America around 1000 AD, Eric was supposed to go with him. He started the journey. Something happened on the way to the ship. He fell from his horse. The sources differ on whether it was an accident or a sign he took as an omen. Either way, Eric turned back. He never made the voyage. He never saw what his son found. Around 1003 AD, an epidemic swept through the Greenland settlement. Eric the Red, the man who had survived 2 exiles, crossed uncharted ocean and built a colony from nothing, died of disease in his home. He was approximately 50 years old. Leif Erikson, who had sailed to North America, outlived his father by years. The man who found a new world died at home in his bed. Bjorn Ironside. Bjorn Ironside earned his name on the battlefield, and for good reason. Medieval accounts describe him walking through battles untouched by blades, his sides seemingly made of iron. Whether that was myth, luck, or exceptional armour, no one alive can say. What's documented is the result. He raided deeper into Europe than almost any Viking before him. In 859 AD, Bjorn led a massive Viking fleet through the Strait of Gibraltar into the Mediterranean. He raided Spain, North Africa, the south of France, and Italy. He sacked the city of Luna on the Italian coast, reportedly tricking the locals by faking his own death, sending word he had converted to Christianity, requesting a Christian burial inside the city walls. And then, once his coffin was carried through the gates, leaping out with his men to attack from within. Whether the coffin story is true or legend, the raids were real. Bjorn Ironside returned to Scandinavia with 60 ships loaded with plunder and a reputation that would outlast him by centuries. He died around 900 AD, ruling as a king in Sweden of natural causes. No dramatic last stand, no treachery, no battlefield. The man who had raided the Mediterranean, faked his own death to conquer an Italian city, and sailed farther from home than almost any Norse commander in history, died old in his own kingdom, having outlived most of his enemies. He was approximately 60 years old. His descendants would rule parts of Sweden for generations. The Ironsides held until the very end. Harald Hardrada. Harald Hardrada, Harold the Hard Ruler, may have been the last truly great Viking warlord. He had served as a Varangian guard for the Byzantine Emperor in Constantinople. He had fought in battles across the Middle East, North Africa, and Eastern Europe. He had ruled Norway for 20 years with an iron grip. By 1066, at the age of 50, he was one of the most experienced military commanders alive. He believed he had a legitimate claim to the English throne. In September 1066, he sailed to England with a fleet of around 300 ships and an army estimated at 9,000 men. It was one of the largest Viking invasion forces ever assembled. He won his first battle easily, defeating the English Earls Edwin and Morcar at the Battle of Fulford Gate. Then King Harold Godwinson of England marched north with his army, covering nearly 200 miles in 4 days, in one of the fastest military marches in medieval history. He hit the Viking army at Stamford Bridge on September 25th, 1066. The Vikings were caught resting, many of them without their armour, which had been left with the ships. Here's where it ended. Harald Hardrada was fighting in the thick of the battle. Massive and terrifying by all accounts, when an arrow struck him in the throat, he dropped. Just like that, the greatest Viking commander of his generation, a man who had survived decades of warfare across 3 continents, killed by a single arrow in the throat. He was 51 years old. The battle was a total Viking defeat. Harold Godwinson's victory at Stamford Bridge was decisive, but it left his army exhausted. 3 days later, William of Normandy landed in the south of England. Godwinson marched his tired troops back south immediately. The Normans won at Hastings. Harald Hardrada's invasion, his death, his defeat, the forced march it triggered, was a direct cause of the Norman conquest of England. An arrow in the throat ended the Viking Age. Sweyn Forkbeard. Sweyn Forkbeard was, for a brief period, the most powerful man in the known world. He was king of Denmark and Norway. In 1013 he conquered England, the only man ever to depose a sitting English king by force of arms during the Viking Age. King Athelred the Unready fled to Normandy. Sweyn sat on the English throne. He had done what no Viking before him had fully managed. His reign over England lasted 5 weeks. On February 3rd, 1014, Sweyn Forkbeard fell from his horse during a military assembly at Gainsborough. He was dead within hours. The exact cause is unknown. Some sources say he cried out in the night, claiming to be attacked by the ghost of St. Edmund, an Anglo-Saxon king he had persecuted. He reportedly screamed that Edmund was running him through with a spear. Then he fell, then he died. Here's what makes this one different from every other death on this list. Swine Forkbeard died at the absolute peak of his power. King of 3 countries, unchallenged, victorious, sleeping in the palace of the kingdom he had just conquered. No enemy reached him. No battle claimed him. No betrayal brought him down. He fell off a horse. The man who conquered England held it for 5 weeks. His son, Canute, eventually reclaimed it, but that took 2 more years of war. What Sweyn had built in a lifetime of campaigning dissolved the moment he hit the ground. He was approximately 40 years old. His body was temporarily buried in England, then returned to Denmark. The most successful Viking invasion in history ended with its leader dying of a fall in the middle of the night, reportedly screaming at a ghost. 6 men, 6 empires built from nothing but longships and nerve. They raided Paris and Constantinople, founded colonies in Greenland, conquered England, and terrorized the Mediterranean. They were the last generation of leaders the Viking Age produced. An arrow in the throat, a snake pit, a fall from a horse, an epidemic in a frozen colony, a quiet disease in a Dublin bed. 6 deaths as different as 6 men could be, and none of them what you'd write for a legend. If you want to know how the next set of legendary warriors fell, subscribe. The next video is already coming.